There are some of these senior terrorists. One is a Taliban member. His name is Corey Zero Rockman, right? He's one of the main people between the Taliban and Al-Qaeda training program. Like, he's as hard as it gets. I think any American who worked against him would be very concerned, right, that he's training people who are coming to America. Another terrorist that doesn't really get talked about, his name is Abu Khabib al-Libi. He actually was a huge trainer during the Bosnian Mujahideen era. A lot of people thought the Russians killed him. They locked him up for years. And he, of course, like most terrorists, showed up after the fall of Afghanistan. And he is now one of the senior trainers. So they do have people who've been in the fight 20, 30 years. They fought in Iraq. They fought in Algeria. They fought in Libya. They fought in Afghanistan. These are very seasoned trainers. They're very smart. A lot of them have been detained by us, or at least another power, like even being detained by the Russians, right? You learn a lot about your enemy. You learn a lot about your enemy's gaps, and then you learn different ways to work within the boundaries of how your enemy does things, right? And you get really smart to stay off their radar.
This is scary. All right, I'm gonna, and if I have to cut this out, I will. I don't care. But I was contacted by someone recently and said I should be looking into a specific organization. I'm going to say the organization, and you let me know if you've ever heard of it, and then maybe if you're interested, tell me what you know of it. But an Organization of Islamic Cooperation. Is that a familiar term to you?
No, I mean, I don't know really that one. To be blunt, I know it comes off conspiratorial, but really one of the biggest issues, in the United States is, unfortunately, the Muslim Brotherhood. They are kind of the financial force behind kind of like all the NGOs and the type of the do-gooders, right, who actually are bringing in terrorists. They're banned in multiple countries, right? Like the Emirates, Saudi Arabia, even Qatar has them banned, but in the United States, we don't have them banned. And I really think they're one of the biggest problems. Now, when you look at an organization like that, and then you look down their funding mechanism, to be honest, it's likely going to be the Muslim Brotherhood, or it'll even be someone like Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda is a multi-billion-dollar organization. They run as a business more times than they run as guys with guns. And a lot of people lose sight of that, right? Like, so the Hajj travel to Saudi Arabia years ago, Al-Qaeda's like, hey, we should get in on this. It'd be really smart, right? We get into the consular sections at embassies. We get into travel agencies. It brings us visas. And so Al-Qaeda now runs a huge percentage of the Hajj travel for the entire world, right? So we have to also look at terrorist groups as businesses. And then even when you bring up, a company like this, double check that they don't actually link back to things like Al-Qaeda or the Muslim Brotherhood, because most do, because that's where the biggest dollars can come from. You can't, unless a foreign government is funding you, like Iran, there's only certain places that can put billions into you, as you can imagine.
Yeah, I have a independent journalist that's like, hey man, this is what I've been finding, and so we're gonna look further into it, for not just for the podcast, but just to deeper dive. And I'm curious about it. It's who they believe is helping a lot of the trafficking from transnational organizations all across the world, and so it's an interesting thing. But I thought it might have kind of aligned with some of the things you were talking about.
Well, one thing I would really focus on, though, is Turkey, right? I mean, we talked about those Uzbeks that came to the border. A number of them actually link back to ISIS networks in Turkey. The ISIS networks in Turkey are very powerful because they supplied the Syrian civil war, and the Syrian civil war has been basically the greatest jihad in the last 10 years. And that's pretty much where I think most trafficking of terrorists falls back to would be Turkey and the organizations around who supplied fighters to Syria.
I'm curious for the numbers of Turkey that's been entering into this country illegally currently, but I do know there is a massive number of uptick of that exact country. Which,
yeah, I mean, it wouldn't surprise me, but the Turks, they'll move they move so many Libyans, they move a lot of people from Tunisia. I mean, a lot of North Africans are getting actually moved, by the Turkish government, to Syria. So it is a big problem, but they also, as you can imagine, have the power, the influence, the connections, because they've been doing it for so long. they have the networks. And that's something we always have to keep in mind, right? Who has these historic networks to do X, Y, and Z, right? Even if you talk about like weapons, right? The weapons moved to Hamas, for example, right? Well, who had the historic networks, right? Obviously, Al-Qaeda in Libya is one, right? Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan is one, right? And so we always have to remember, too, this really goes back to a lot of the old actors, and they enable all these type of things.
Scary. Scary stuff. I'm just trying to wrap my head around, how as a country, let me ask this one, how as a country could we make steps in our government or policies made that can help protect our nation even more so? Because right now it feels like, things that are in place aren't in our advantage to protect our homeland security.
Yeah, I mean, I know people call it racist, but I do believe in bans on countries that we can't get background checks on, right? So Syria, for example, if you're not going to give us background details on your citizens, right, they'll never come to the United States. There should be a travel ban. There used to be one in Libya.